It's a great day. Welcome to That's Great IT, your one-stop place to learn about IT ops by turning IT noise into insights and manual tasks into automated actions, powered by BigPanda. I'm your host, Craig Ferrara. Join me as I talk to tech experts and people from different walks of life, sharing great insights, the latest trends, and relevant topics about IT ops and AI ops. This is That's Great IT, powered by BigPanda. All right, and today we are joined by Rob Schnepp. Did I get that right, Rob? Rob Schnepp at BlackRock.
Yes, you did. Yep.
Brilliant. And I appreciate it. So, Rob, real quick, just to set the stage for everybody here, where are you joining us from today? Where are you at?
I'm in the Bay Area of California, in the city of Alameda.
Awesome. I'm also in the Bay Area. I am just north of Berkeley in an area called El Cerrito. People have heard of Alameda, Berkeley, Oakland. Nobody's ever heard of El Cerrito, but we're practically neighbors.
We are practically. I have heard of El Cerrito too. Makes it any better.
You're a local though, so that's understandable. So for everybody joining us today, the focus today is root cause analysis. And particularly interesting topic for me because actually Rob and I were discussing before we started recording here, what are we talking about when we say root cause? And Rob, just to get us kicked off here today, you brought up a really good point. There's two different ways that people think about root cause in the context of incident management. So maybe you could summarize what are the two different focus areas for conversations around root cause and incident management?
Yeah, absolutely. Our experience in the consulting business here, I'm one of the principals of BlackRock 3 Partners, and we do IT incident management, program development, professional services, gap analysis to best practices type reports, and we've done global training for incident commanders and documenters and communications people during high severity IT incidents. So we've been around the block, really. We've been doing this almost a decade, and we've circled the globe a whole bunch of times. And what we find to be a really consistent thing here is that when people talk about root cause, you almost really have to determine what root cause you're talking about, because there's root cause analysis after the event, which provides a learning opportunity and is typically focused on the technology failure. But then there's also this quest for the holy grail of what is the root cause during the incident. And it's typically asked as a diagnostic question, a lot of times right in the middle of the firefight, so to speak, whereby I have this really high attachment to know what the root cause is. And we find this really consistent among our customer base. We're in the middle of what's happening. What's the root cause? What's going on? When will this be resolved? And it's really almost part a trifecta of questions. That's what's the cause? What are we doing? And when will this be fixed? And so really even begin talking about root cause, almost have to think about which one we're speaking about. Is it during the incident? How do we use data and metrics and AI and applications and monitoring tools and all that sort of thing to point the team down the road? And or are we talking about how we learn, get better, and understand from really almost a fire prevention perspective, how we can try to avoid this sort of thing from happening again?
I love the way to break that down. And when I come across the root cause analysis question, it's typically, and from my professionally and my role working at BigPanda, when we're talking about root cause most often, it's typically the latter in that case with a lot of our customers. And root cause in that context means where's actionability lie for my operator in order to soothe this pain that we're experiencing. Something just happened, an alert storm came in. What is the thing at the core of this issue that our operators need to fix, or things that they need to fix in order to resolve all of these issues? Now, from a post-incident review perspective, that's not necessarily the actual root cause. The actual root cause may lie in some sort of release mechanism that failed or some sort of breakdown in process. That's the true root cause. But again, in the context of this is happening right now, what do my operators do? Root cause from that perspective is always going to be, what does my operator need to focus on in order to get us out of this predicament that we're in? So maybe for today's conversation, let's treat things chronologically. An incident has just come in, and we'll talk a little bit about maybe root cause during the incident itself. And then let's wrap up talking a little bit about post-incident review and root cause analysis, and just thinking through What are companies trying to accomplish when they say root cause as an incident is happening? And what does that mean for operators? And so where we're starting our conversation, from your experience, Rob, when you're working with companies that are incident operations during the shift of an operator, when they're thinking through root cause identification and what that is, where are companies at today? What are they doing? Or what are the questions that they're asking of BlackRock 3 when they're working with you guys around root cause identification?
I think you hit it on the head a minute ago when you said it looks like it's a collection of data and information gained from monitoring tools and other places of intelligence in order to find a direction to point the resolution. That's a lot to put on a business card. And so I think what that really means is a shorthand. Root cause means a shorthand way of all that, what we just said. When I say, what's the root cause? What that implies to me, in our experience typically, is the asker of the question. It's a cry for hope. It's a, please, if you can tell me what the root cause is, then likely we can find a pathway to resolution. But at the end of the day, it's much like being a paramedic, if you think about it, and I also come from the fire service, is that you diagnose a very complex machine, a person, and you may not know exactly what the root cause of their medical issue is, the signs and symptoms, what the incident is telling you. And in many cases, the monitoring tools are telling you some things, your pool of experience is telling you some things, your perhaps social mentions or your business people are gathering business impact. And root cause is really about assembling a story in context. And at the end of the day, it becomes a naming convention, really. But the focus point should be, let's release our quest to name the root cause and focus more on signs and symptoms. And if you think about that, it helps a whole lot of different things, right? People in messaging, if they're giving a message out to a customer base or executives in a company, so to speak, that's the dance that we've well established. What's the root cause? We're not sure. We're looking into it. When we're trying, what do you see? We see this. When really at the end of the day, it's much easier to message by saying, we're seeing these signs and symptoms in the environment. Signs are those things that come from your monitoring tools. They're objective. You can put your finger on them. You can share queries and all kinds of data and screen share and that sort of thing. And it's as factual as you can be. Symptoms are things that are less specific and they're a little bit more subjective. This is slow, or we have a lot of people that can't do something, or we got multiple customers impacted. And so there's really not numerical rigor you can put around it, but it leads you down a path. And at the end of the day, when you start collecting signs and symptoms, it gives you a much richer bit of data and information, because now if I'm messaging, I've got more of a story to tell. I may not know the name of the root cause, but I can tell you what we're seeing and what our monitoring tools are telling us. And so it's easier to communicate signs and symptoms and the status quo and really finding the center of gravity in the incident. And so at the end of really what we tell our customers is just take that off the table at the beginning. If you're in the middle of running something and people are asking questions, take it right off the table. Root cause is unknown. Estimated time of resolution is unknown at this time. However, what we see and know is X, Y, and Z, and just anchor people to the what's known at the moment. And root cause will show up at the end. We'll know what the root cause is. It can be multiple things. We know at the end, but let's not let the naming convention stand in the way of forward momentum and or good usable messaging at the beginning.
That is incredibly sage advice. And the reason I offer that coming out of your monologue there was because for our listeners, Rob and I didn't discuss this ahead of time. We don't discuss what we're going to say on our podcast episodes ahead of time. So this is the first time I'm hearing some of these tidbits. But the practical advice of taking out the burden of identifying root cause in the middle of an incident and almost keeping that out of the distractions that are happening all around us as people, in some cases, especially during major incidents that are customer or revenue impacting, people's hair can light on fire. And so keeping everyone focused on here's what we know, let's triage the problem at hand and stop using buzzwords like what's the root cause to act like a distraction is really good advice. And Rob, in the air of we haven't rehearsed any of this, but let me throw a curveball at you. As people are handling incidents, and let's say they're following good practice, we're not asking root cause questions, but in the air of identifying where the actionability for an operator lies to triage and remediate an issue, right? What is the role of things like a CMDB or topology or observability? What's the role of software and technology in helping operators get to the understanding of where their actions lie in order to remediate a problem today? Not using the term root cause.
So I would back that up even a little bit more. If you're an incident responder, there's three things in your head all the time, especially if you're a commander or a leader of any incident. Number one, my main goal is to ensure forward momentum in the resolution. Can't spin on the unknowns or what we can't do or that sort of thing. We always have to be pushing forward momentum, and information creates momentum. The more we can know, the quicker we can make good decisions. And incident response is not about fast decisions. That's a misconception. It's not about making fast decisions. It's about making the best decision you can make in the shortest amount of time based on what you know at the time. And the more the technology can generate, the more I can understand and assimilate and put it in context will allow me to gain situational awareness and make quicker decisions. So efficiency is speed. Speed is not efficiency in all cases. And so if I'm thinking about this as a commander, I want all of the metrics, all of the monitoring tools. I want all that information coming to me, but uncorrelated, it means nothing. It's just a whole bunch of noise, right? So the whole idea is, how do you generate it? How do you corral it? How do you understand it? How do you formulate a plan and then keep moving forward? Now, information and data can also be disruptions. And it's the killer of momentum is disruptions. And asking the kind of stage inappropriate, what's the root cause question creates a disruption, because we don't know. If we knew, we'd tell you. It's not really that important that we name it. It's more understand what we're learning about the environment moving forward. So a lot of uncorrelated information can turn into distractions, really, if you think about it, because you can start chasing red herrings here and there, or you can analysis to paralysis this thing to death and not actually start moving forward on it. And so really, I think keeping in mind that we've got to keep moving forward, and we need to have good information. This is great to know. This is nice to know. Let's put it over here. Maybe it'll mean something later. But that to me is really, at the end of the day, where AI and everything else fits into it. Is the electronic technology is there to inform the best computer in the world, which is right underneath your skull. So give that computer the decision-making skill and inform it with all the other things that you can learn from the environment and the technology.
To me, it's almost like a problem that is also the solution. Great monitoring has given us more visibility into the status of our services that we're all trying to support every single day. But with better monitoring came a explosion of data that we, as humans, can't necessarily process in real time. And so we also need technology then to make sense of that data and bring us the most actionable. Think of it as signal and noise. We need signal. What I don't need is a bunch of events that are coming in that are potentially unrelated or not necessarily related to anything that me as an operator need to understand in order to look at signs and symptoms of an issue. It's not related to me actually arriving at a remediation of a particular incident or ticket if I've received something in an ITSM tool, right? So you've got technology that's created great visibility, but also created a problem of too much information. Then we're using technology in order to make sense of all of that information. And I think that, to me, at least from my experience, is where companies can make or break the efficiency of their teams, is how are you making sense of all the information that's flowing in? And it all, I think, starts from what is the quality of the alerts that are coming in through monitoring? Do we have complete information related to the systems that are being monitored and observed? And Rob, what are you seeing from a lot of the companies that you're working with? How are companies doing this today? Are they very good at it? Is noise and the proliferation of noise a big issue currently for a lot of the companies that you guys are working with? Or are companies doing a pretty good job of trying to get ahead of this data problem? This too much data for an operator?
I think it's a point of confusion at the most important point, foundational point, I'll say, in incident response, and that's how to assemble the talent. And companies rely on monitoring and alerting and all that sort of thing in order to figure out who needs to show up to the party to resolve this thing. And if the monitoring levels are set in improper places, then you're starting to set people up for failure, because then there's a lot of cry wolf stuff going on. So it's been nothing the last 25 times, so why should I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go chase another false alarm? And so the relationship here is, to me, if you think about resolution, and companies are really focused on mean time to resolve, how long did it take us to fix this problem? That, to me, is the wrong obsession. The right obsession is mean time to assemble, MTTA. Because if you don't have a good MTTA, then you're never going to have an optimized MTTR. And MTTA is really a rules-based approach to assembling your talent, which is then foundationally tied to monitoring tools, really, at the end of the day. And so if you got blank spots in the environment, then you'll never get the right people there quick enough to resolve the problem. If all the levels and the settings are wrong, then we may not be able to correlate issue to resolvers, to customer base, to parts of the environment, and all those sorts of things. And so the obsession should be, how do we get eyes into the environment in every single place where we could have problems? How do we create service mapping, or whatever term you want to use, to find out where those fingers will go into the environment, and then match the responders to that and figure out a way to get them there quickly? There are a lot of companies we run into, our MTTA is 4 hours to get together. And I'm always surprised by that, because I come from the fire service, and your house is on fire and you want me to wait 4 hours to go and get a team together and go figure it out? That seems like a long time. However you set those SLAs really is dependent on figuring out that perfect balance between where the monitoring tools are, what the talent is, and then how do you recruit them and get them putting everything in context, just like you said, figuring out signal and getting ready to move this thing forward. And I think in a lot of cases, it's almost like we monitor to determine it's nothing. And a lot of times incident response is about just believe it's something until you can prove it's nothing, versus mess around with it thinking it's nothing and then it surprises you and it is something. And those, I think, are two different perspectives. Now, on one hand, you could have a whole bunch of false alarms that you're responding all your people to. That's not good either. But I do think there's a sweet spot in the middle there where it's important to understand in context the right amount of monitoring against the way to recruit your people quickly and get them eyes on the fire. That's what we call it in the fire service.
And again, reinforcing the fact that we're not talking about identifying root cause during an incident. We're talking about maximizing actionability of alerting and through correlation and elimination of noise, and making sure that you have got the right responders associated with that incident as quickly as possible. And at the end of the day, if you reduce that mean time to assemble, you will see the reduced mean time to resolution. But your focus area isn't the resolution. The focus area is reduction of noise and getting the right responders associated with the incident as quickly and efficiently as possible. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. Think about this. If you have operations, it doesn't matter if you're dispatching trucks or you're fixing windows, or you've got a construction company or a fire department or an IT company. It doesn't matter. If there's an operational component to anything you do, then you will also have incident operations when things go wrong. And that transition from normal to incident is really critical. And if you think about any operationally based company, there are things you can control and things you cannot control. And what you cannot control are these novel problems that are thrown at you by bad actors, or problems in the environment, or any multitude of things that you never thought were ever going to happen. And that's why it's called an incident. It's an unplanned thing that happened that required intervention by a team of responders to bring it back into normal limits. But what you can control is daily operations. And so there's a direct correlation between controlling the things you can in order to set yourself up for success against the things that you cannot. And so it's a fool's errand for a company to say, we must resolve all our incidents in 90 minutes. That's like telling the fire department, well, I don't care if Costco's on fire or a dumpster's on fire. It's 90 minutes. That's just the way it's going to be. And it's too arbitrary. And so I think in many cases, the difficult conversations and the hard lifting is in the area of what you can control in order to give yourself the most runway in those things you cannot control, because that's the novel problem. And people say, well, that took us 4 hours to resolve. Did it really? Or did it take you 3 hours to figure out what the problem was and get the right people there, and it took the right person coming in and it took them 30 minutes to fix the problem, right? So really breaking down and understanding mean time to assemble will give a company a tremendous amount of benefit in really understanding how long it takes them to fix stuff. And the key message, I think, in summary is focus heavily on mean time to assemble as much as you possibly can. And the added byproduct of that is you will give your teams much more runway, much more information, much more predictability, way less emotional drama, that less reduced frustration of like, where's this person? They're supposed to be here and I can't get them, and they're not showing up and they're mission critical, and why are they not showing up? And that dev team never shows, and all that sort of thing. And so it just takes a lot of the drama out of it, and it turns it into this predictable launch sequence of your talent to go out and then step into the pond of the unknown to fix whatever problem showed up.
That makes a lot of sense. And by the way, for our listeners, I should note that Rob is surrounded by firefighting memorabilia. He's got firefighter helmets on his wall, multiple patches from, I'm assuming, different teams and different firehouses potentially that you had worked with in the past. So that hearing all of these fire analogies, at least from my perspective right now, Rob and I are talking on camera together, it resonates very differently when you see all of the fire memorabilia as well. So just keep that in your minds as you're listening to these. Rob, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I would say that's a great segue thinking about, okay, how are we handling incidents? Let's shift and talk a little bit about, again, we're still talking root cause analysis, but we established early on, when you're thinking about incidents, you don't necessarily think about root cause. There's a different way to think about incidents, even though many businesses think about get to root cause as quickly as possible for operators. We just talked about, hey, that's really not what you're asking. So now let's actually talk about root cause identification and talk a little bit about the post-incident review. So Rob, in your own words, what is root cause analysis then, if you're thinking about incident, post-incident, post-mortems, whatever you want to call it, root cause analysis, what is that to you?
Okay. Yeah, we typically, at least in our business, we shy away from the use of post-mortem because mortem does not insinuate anything good.
Fair.
And
yes.
we use a bigger bucket. It's called after-action review, or AAR. And when we think back to an incident life cycle, that's something in our consulting practice we've developed as a predictable incident life cycle. Doesn't matter what it is, it follows a pretty similar trajectory. But the three big buckets are MTTA, assembling your team based on monitoring and what's going on. Resolution, which, we want metrics on mean time to resolve and all the rest of that sort of thing. But then there's the AAR piece, the after action review. And the after action review, in my opinion, really needs to be looked at as root cause is a piece of an AAR. It's not the AAR. Now, if you've got a vendor relationship or you've got customers that you need to supply them with a post-mortem or after action review, whatever you want to call it, what you're doing is you're saying, here's the technology thing that broke and here's what happened and here's what we're doing about it. Is they want to know what the technology problem was and how that will be avoided down the road. But I think really a true after action review uses the technology failure as a component, which is important, no question. But the other two pieces are, how did the people respond to that thing that broke? And was there a clear linkage in our whole constellation of the environment to say, yes, we linked together problem identification with responders, and boy, we did a great job on that. And that was awesome because we knocked this thing out in 10 minutes. We resolved in 5 minutes, and it was really good. And I think that second focus on what was the human aspect of the response? Did we actually utilize all of the monitoring tools and the information that came to us in a good and effective way? Did people show up on time? Were they aggressive and engaged problem solvers? Did we have great dispatching so we were able to get everybody there in some predictable amount of time, whatever the threshold is that you set for that? Did we have good productive conversations? Did our problem solving platforms, like whatever video conferencing service you use or whatever the chat function you use, did all that work? And that links a lot to the technology, because if we can come back and say this particular piece of the technology failed, and guess what? We were blind over there and we had no idea how to get to that. We needed mainframe engineers for some antiquated piece of your equipment, and you didn't have a nearby graveyard to go find one. So did that work? Did that mapping exercise work for us? And the third piece of it is, what sort of metrics and business impact were realized in that sort of thing? Was it a threat? Did we suffer reputational risk? Did we suffer financial impacts? Did we suffer erosion of trust in our customer base, or whatever it happens to be? Can we assign, at least in some broad brush stroke, some dollar figure associated with this? Some of our customers are down to per minute. They know what a minute of downtime costs them. And so it's real easy to calculate that against the life cycle of the incident. And boy, I'll tell you, when our customers start looking at lost revenue or make good fees or that sort of thing in hard dollar cost or staff time or things that did not get done because people were dedicated to these incidents, it's staggering the amount of money that goes out the door, not because of the incident, but because of the inefficiency. And so I think the root cause analysis, when looked at as a three-legged stool, you've got the technology failure, the impact, and the response. Now you can do some really good learning. And what I will say is, many companies lose it on the dismount with post-mortems and after-action reviews, because they don't. It's like, yeah, we identified 3 things that need to get done, and it gets pushed out into a queue, and then in big air quotes I'm doing on the screen right here, somebody should take care of that. And I've never seen an employee badge that says somebody on it, and then nothing ever happens. There's got to be accountability in that. There has to be true fixes, and I'm sure you've seen this yourself, that many companies have a lot of self-inflicted incidents, and they just don't have the commitment to go back and actually spend the money and put the staff time in, and everybody in IT is running at red line in terms of their workload, and so it's just a matter of time. And I think a lot of companies are like, whoo, boy, we're glad we survived that one. Hope that doesn't happen again. And that's just not a good way to do business. So I think the lens has to be widened out quite a bit to really look at a true root cause analysis, and call it that if you want, but add those other components to it to really give you an actual idea of what happened.
And I don't think many companies do that yet. I think you're challenging what a root cause analysis is when you talk about an after action review, an AAR, where a big component of that is, how did we perform? Because usually companies do post-incident reviews or major incident reviews in the name on major incidents. You can't do this for 15,000 priority 4 incidents that come in on a monthly basis. You just can't. But you definitely do it for your P1s, right? The ones that have been tied to the business, have been tied to revenue, have been tied to the brand or the customer. But there is a big focus on what happened, why did this even start, and how can we prevent it moving forward. But I think what you've just highlighted is that it ignores the fact that the impact of this major incident was magnified potentially by the incident response itself, right? Yes, something bad happened to a mission critical system, but the extent of the impact this had on the business was a direct function of how we responded to it. If it took us 4 hours, we had a 4-hour duration of something pretty damaging. But if our response had been good or better, it could have been a 1 hour or a 2 hour, but even still a huge percentage less in the duration of a major incident that has some type of negative impact on the business. it's a really good thing to think about in a root cause analysis of the problem that just occurred, to look at both sides of that. This isn't just an issue with the system that failed. It is also a symptom of our ability to respond to this issue in the future. Because for all the leading cause identification you can do, yes, sure, if you're able to identify leading causes, you might catch this exact same thing that happens in the future. But I think a better way to protect the business, and Rob, correct me if you disagree, but a better way to protect the business down the road is to also look at your response to say, even if this isn't the exact same thing that happens again in the future, and leading causes for this next major incident that we don't know about is going to occur, they're different. If we can do incident response better as an organization, perform that response, then regardless of what that major incident is, regardless of what the technical root cause is, the impact of that major incident is reduced significantly.
Totally. I agree 100%. Companies throw around this term incident management all the time, and we run into this frequently. And they say, yes, we do incident management. At the end of the day, incident management is a description of the entire practice. It's like saying, I'm a physician. Are you a orthopedic surgeon? Are you a pediatric ICU person? Do you work in burn units? Are you a general practitioner? There's many different pieces of the practice, and when we say we do incident management, in many cases, companies say we have a call leader, an incident commander, an incident leader, whatever, thereby we do incident management. And that's just 100% not true. Incident management is a description of the practice. What you have to have below that is you've got to have identified roles and responsibilities that can be clearly deployed, and they have to have a scope of practice. You got to have some type of rules of engagement. Now, I'm not a big believer that you have cookbooks to resolve. I don't think that's the right way, because everything you do is an edge case and it doesn't fit neatly into the boxes, and then people get wrapped around the axle because it's like, well, that wasn't in step 8, so I'm not quite sure what to do. But I do think you have to have general guidelines and operational principles. But the underpinning is getting the talent there as quick as you possibly can to start thinking and putting things in context. The second part of the last part of incident management is the performance. We always have to evaluate our performance, and do we have the right people with the right characteristics making, like behavioral characteristics, human elements making the right decisions within those roles and responsibilities, working in the practice. Now we're talking incident management. So it all ties back to after action reviews, saying that AAR is as much a part of incident management as command and control. And if done well, then we can learn lessons from that. There's so many tentacles here, probably a whole nother topic for a whole other podcast, is that if we don't have any metrics at the beginning to figure out what we're trying to analyze, then we're just coming up with a bunch of numbers. But when you start figuring out what you want to look at measuring wise and what kind of metrics you want to have, then you can root cause analysis. A lot of times beyond the technology failure is better, worse, or the same. Did we respond better? Did we assemble quicker or not? One way or yeah, it's just predictable. And we had one customer that they put a lot of elbow grease into their MTTA, and instantly their MTTR dropped by 65%. That's an enormous number when you think about it. And it's enormous whenever you think about your customer base on the back end. So 65% of the time, you're going to be much happier because we just fixed the problem quicker. And so the long-winded answer, but I think understanding that incident management is a description of the practice, and AARs are just as important as anything else that you're doing, and understanding the human element and the contextual way that you make decisions really is going to pay back, because you can never estimate what the next problem is going to be. And it may be teams get overwhelmed. Even the best prepared teams get overwhelmed. I mean, look at these gigantic wildland fires or the World Trade Center. Nobody ever thought that was going to happen, and it did. And we had to do something about it. And so there's no playbook for that. There's no script for that. But we have to have an understanding of our strengths and weaknesses in the practice of incident management to be able to arrive and have a good outcome, really, at the end of the day.
Rob, you can bet I just made a note on a future podcast with you talking a bit about those metrics. But I think you summarized the key takeaways from today's episode perfectly. And I love the way that you reframed the topic of root cause analysis. and you're trying to take people away from the technological component that might be the root cause of a particular incident during an incident, and stressing out over finding that one thing rather than focusing on your practice. And in the after action review, holding the incident process in equal weight to identifying the underlying technological issue that occurred that maybe could be prevented or built more stable in the future. If you have that frame of mind, you're going to have the biggest positive impact as an IT organization that you possibly can for your business. And I think a lot of companies out there probably need a bit of a shift in the way that they're framing that conversation internally when they're talking about root cause. Just want to thank you for joining us today for this episode. That's Rob Schnepp from BlackRock 3, broadcasting with me from the Bay Area of California. Rob, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on a future episode.
Great. Well, Craig, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure, and have a good rest of the day.
That was great. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This has been That's Great IT, your one-stop place to learn about IT ops and AI ops, powered by BigPanda. Catch us on our next episode.